New day and another laptop that needs to be saved, and this time we have a Dell G-series 5500. This is like a 2021 model. This one was sent in by another repair shop. They said that their customer brought it in because they put it in hibernation and they let it sit for a couple weeks, and when they turned it back on, within a couple minutes they heard a loud pop and then the machine shut off and they haven't been able to turn it back on since. So I haven't taken a look at this yet. Let's take a look together to see if we can get this figured out. Okay, what I'm seeing here is this machine looks almost brand new. This is a G-series, so this can be like a lower end gaming laptop. Lower end meaning they made it in plastic. A lot of times it has the same components as like an Alienware. This particular one, I don't think it uses the same components as an Alienware, but the first thing we want to do is see if it turns on. And we're not getting anything. Let's plug in our power meter. Just keep an eye right here. We just want to see how much current's being drawn. And so when we plug this in, we'll be able to see if the laptop is actually speaking with the charger and turning on. Ooh, okay. Well, I just plugged it in and I don't know if you noticed, but the charger just went off. So this usually means we have like a dead short on the main power rail. When we plug in a charger, the charger will put 20 volts onto the main power rail, which will energize all the rest of the power rails. But because the charger just shut off, it means that there's a short and it's putting itself in protection mode and shutting itself off so it doesn't create any more damage. Now, if the customer is using like an aftermarket charger, not a Dell genuine, they can actually cause more damage to their motherboard because a lot of times those don't have protections in them to shut themselves off properly. So let's hope that they are using a genuine charger. Let's go ahead and get the bottom opened up and take a look inside. All right, I'm about to pull the bottom off. But one thing I did notice is that, you know, the laptop's clean, almost looks brand new. But if you look on the bottom, you can actually see how dusty the fans are here. So you can see that it has had plenty of use. They're just taking care of the outside. And we're going to open the bottom up. And we have to be very careful. There's actually a cable that connects this light across the front. And it attaches straight to the base. And it's kind of, you know, most people forget about it and rip it right off the board. So we're going to be very careful when we open this. All right, so we're going to lift this off slowly because there is a cable connected under here. Let's see if I can show you. So they have it attached right to the bottom here. And so we just got to be very careful not to just rip it off the board. It just lights up the front of the gaming machine to make it kind of look a little cooler. All right, inside the laptop, it actually looks pretty clean. So what I was seeing from the outside were these vents here. You can see that they are covered in a little bit of fuzz, just a little bit, but you know, this is kind of a ridiculous design. They do have this very fine mesh, not very good airflow on this machine. So let's take a quick look around. We do have the main battery here, Dell OEM. There's the CMOS battery. It's a regular 2032. A couple sticks of RAM, one NVMe. There's the wireless card, a couple fans. Fans aren't too bad. So because when we plug in the charger, it shuts off right when we plug it in. We know there's a dead short probably on the main power rail. And let's figure out where the main power rail or where the DC jack is. So here it is, plugs in, and it comes onto the board right here. So let's take a look at this section of the board. We're going to take some measurements. Let's get under the microscope. Okay, so here's where the DC jack plugs into the motherboard. And so a few of these are going to be positive and a few are going to be the ground, and then we're going to have a communication line. So it looks like these four are tied together, those four are tied together. This one is on its own, and this one's on its own. So this one looks like it's probably the PSID pin. So there's always going to be an extra pin that is the communication line between the charger and the laptop, telling it what wattage it is, or else the laptop doesn't know how much current to pull, and it won't charge the battery, and it will run kind of slow, things like that. So we're going to measure right at the DC jack, and I'm going to put the meter in continuity mode, where when you touch the probes together, they beep. And so I'm going to put one side on ground, and then I'm going to figure out which side is ground here. So that's measuring nothing. So this is the ground side. So these four pins are going to be tied to ground. This is going to be the positive 20 volts coming from the charger. If you just follow the path here, you can see that it comes over here and it comes into this MOSFET. The way a MOSFET works is it's more or less like a switch. So this one has 3 legs going in, 4 legs coming out, and then there's an on-off switch. And these act as the protection for the motherboard. So these actually should be shut off to protect the motherboard from any further damage. So if we measure here, we're not measuring a short. Let's see on the other side of this, we're not measuring a short on the other side. And then this one comes into another one, and we're not measuring a short there. And most likely we're going to have a short on the output of this. So if we take a look right here, we are measuring a short. And if we look at what measurement it is, it's 0.14, 0.13. That's pretty much a 0 dead short. And then it goes through this current sense resistor, and this is what's actually detecting that there's a short on the board. So it's detecting how much current's going through this one resistor. And then we have a power management chip, which I don't see is on this side of the board. I think it's on the other side of the board, but the power management chip is what actually turns on and off these MOSFETs. and is monitoring that current sense resistor and telling those MOSFETs to turn off. So what's going to happen here is we're going to have to figure out what is shorted. Most likely it's going to be a component that is, if we have a dead short like that, it usually points to like a capacitor or something like that, because the higher the resistance, the more likely it's something else. Like the CPU would be like a 2 ohm resistance or 2.5 or 3 or something like that, depending upon the CPU. The GPU could be as low as 0.3, 0.4. On this machine, since we're measuring 0.1, I think that we do have probably a shorted capacitor somewhere, which would be good news for this customer. We'll be able to resolve the issue. Now, it could be something not as simple as that, but we can use voltage injection to see if we can figure out if anything's getting hot on this side of the board without having to remove the board first. So the way voltage injection works is we will inject a low voltage but a higher current, and whatever is actually shorted to ground will start heating up, and we'll monitor it under the thermal camera. So I'm going to get my short killer set up here. I'm going to set the voltage to something low since the resistance is very low. So we're going to go down to like a 0.5 volt. And so we should be able to pull, a couple amps at 0.5 volt, and that will allow us to see what's getting hot. We have the thermal camera pulled up here, and so we should be able to see what's getting hot pretty quickly. So I got one side attached to ground, and then we're just going to inject voltage right there where we saw that there was a short. And we got 5 amps going through there, so we can go down just a little bit. We don't need 5 amps going through it. There we go. So down to 3 amps at 0.4 volts, and let's just see if we see anything getting hot. This over here looks like a reflection to me, but if it changes when we add the voltage and take it away, and then we can also just kind of move the board as a reflection. Yeah, it's a reflection. See, I'm just tilting the board. So it's not that. CMOS battery looks like it could be the issue, but I think that is just a reflection also. So let's just kind of sweep around the board while I'm holding that voltage on that current sense resistor. Those are more reflections. More reflections. So I don't see anything popping out, and it could be something under the heatsink here. So we could take the heatsink off before removing the motherboard just to see if that's the issue. So let's go ahead and get the heatsink removed. Yeah, if the short is underneath the heatsink, then that's usually bad news, because that's the CPU and GPU are under here. And a lot of times we won't be able to see it getting hot because the heatsink is actually dissipating the heat faster than the thermal camera can detect it. So this could be a short on the GPU, because that's going to be the lowest resistance on here, but I'm doubtful. I actually think that it's going to be something more like a capacitor. Okay, we have the heatsink removed. Thermal paste looks factory. Not too bad, it's a little dry. All right, so now that we have this is the CPU, this is the GPU. Now that we have that exposed, we can start injecting voltage again. All right, so now let's try it again. So I'm trying to look closely here. This is the CPU. We see a little spot in the corner, but I think that's just a reflection. I'm going to tilt the board. Yep, so that's just a reflection. And then the GPU is over here, and I'm going to tilt the board also again. It's not changing. So I don't see anything on this side of the board. So we will have to remove the motherboard. We can go up a little bit on the voltage now that we know that the CPU and GPU are not getting that voltage, because that's mainly what we want to protect, is things that are sensitive to voltage. And so if it was shorted through the CPU, we wouldn't want to put more than the volt in there. And if it was shorted through the GPU, we wouldn't want to do that. So now that we know that it actually is not one of those two items, we can up the voltage. And so now we're up to what, 0.7? And we'll see how many amps are going to go through there with 0.7. So we're at like 8 amps. So, and there we go. We found something getting hot. And it is over here on this side of the board. So I can go back down again, now that we kind of isolated the area. So it looks like it's going to be over here on the CPU, actually. And there it is. We can see it getting hot. And I'm going to tilt the board, and the CPU is not getting hot. It's just a reflection. So I have the board tilting, and we can see that it's getting hot right on, I think it's this one. So these are, well, we have resistors here, but I think it's the square. You can see that it's going to be one of these power MOSFET drivers for the CPU, but I do see something weird over here. You see that dot on that resistor? That's like a melted solder. That's strange. You see that? Right there? Now, I don't know if that means that that's been getting hot. Probably. So if this is shorted to ground, that's what it seems like it is since the resistance is so low. Basically, these MOSFET driver packages they basically have 2 MOSFETs in them, and they have it where it will reduce the voltage to 20 volts down to 1.1 volts or 0.7 volts or whatever the CPU is using at any given time. But there's a low side and a high side. So high side is going to be what's actually driving the CPU, and the low side is going to be going to ground. And most likely the low side is what's shorted, and that's just making where the 20 volts go straight down to ground through that MOSFET, which is actually really good news, which protects the actual CPU from any damage. But I want to see which one it is. I'm pretty sure it's this one on the end. But we're going to add a little bit of alcohol to it, which will help us identify which one's getting hot. And we'll monitor it again. And let's go ahead and inject that voltage. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's this one on the end. You see how it's kind of has a little bit of heat signature around it. Now, I'm not seeing it displacing, so it could be on the other side of the board. So that's kind of like where you kind of have to say, well, is it that component? Because if it was getting diffuse like that, and we were putting so many amps into it, it may just be a capacitor on the other side of the board. So the right thing to do at this point would be not to guess. Plus, we're going to have to, in order to change that out, we have to take it out of the case because this case is made of plastic, everything's going to melt. But I think the right thing to do now is we'll remove the motherboard, we can examine the other side of the board and see if we see the issue on there. And if everything's clear, then we'll probably just change out that MOSFET. I have to say this is a very good design for Dell to have made it where you can take the heatsink off without having to take the whole motherboard out. That has been a major issue that I've found with a lot of these gaming laptops is the fans are bolted onto the heatsink. And whenever you're taking it apart to rethermal paste, you actually have to remove the entire motherboard because the fans plug in on the opposite side. And by doing that, then you create more of an obstacle to actually change out your thermal paste or to clean the fans properly. And so you can create more damage. So I like that this is actually pretty modular and you can just take the heatsink off. The fans are bolted on separately and that makes it a lot easier to service. All right, we got the motherboard out. Let's take a look on the other side where those MOSFETs were. So here's where we were detecting some heat. So let's take a look right on the other side. Ooh, I do see it. I'm glad that we didn't just jump to the conclusion of, yeah, we need to replace that. So here's what the actual issue is. We do have a couple capacitors that have, this one's cracked, this one is exploded and melted. We do have some damaged traces here, some melted components here. So all 3 of these will need to be replaced. Now we may have a little bit of problems trying to get a new one put here, but I'm going to replace all 3 of them. And this should resolve our short and hopefully the CPU survived. But you know, only time will tell. So let's just start by getting these 3 components removed. So I'm just going to add a little bit of flux to start out. We need to make sure that we'll be able to get the solder to flow. It's going to be hard because whenever something gets this much heat, what ends up happening is the metal actually melts. So it welds itself to the board. So we're gonna have an issue like this. This isn't really solder right here. This is gonna be melted metal. And so we're not gonna be able to get that off. I might need to cut it off or grind it off or break it off. And this one should be able to get off just fine. Okay, got that one off. This is actually cracked. You can see how bad it is really cracked. But I don't know if this was the original cause or not. Oh, this one came off pretty well. That's good. And then this one is probably okay. But this is the trace that's kind of messed up. And I'm not going to be able to melt that off of there because that's actually melted metal. So we're going to have to try to grind that off of there. And this pad or trace is gone. And you can see how this pad or trace is gone right here. So there's nothing to solder to there. But we do have this whole area. So it looks like this whole area is the same. So we may be able to double up on here. Like as long as we can connect here to here, because it's the same area, we should be okay. Electrically. So if I touch these together, that's the same as this. This is all one big pad or trace. So, you know, theoretically, we can maybe even put 2 capacitors right here and then put 1 right there and just ignore that. That's probably what I'm going to end up doing. Let me see if we can add some fresh solder on these pads here. And I want to see if we can get this actually cleaned up enough. So I'm going to add some, this is a lower melt solder, it's like 183 degrees. And see, again, this part I'm not going to be able to get off. I'm going to try to, let me see if I can grind that down. If I can grind that down, then we should be able to connect a capacitor across there still. So I'm just going to use this little grinding pin. Might need a stronger bit, but let's see. Let's see if I can pick up some of that. I don't want all this, these flakes everywhere. See if I can pick up some of this again. Okay, that actually looks pretty good. Let me now try to add some solder back on here. Okay, that'll work. All right, there we go. We got that cleaned up. Let's verify that the short is gone. That was one thing that we haven't done yet, but we do have that area prepped. So if we go back and measure at the current sense resistor, this is where we are injecting voltage. And we can check right there, and it's open. So it's showing that we don't have a short anymore. That means that it's not going to short out the charger anymore, but we're going to need to replace those 3 capacitors. And let me grab a donor board. I don't know what the values of these are. I mean, generally they are the same value on most boards, but I do have donor boards, and we can just transplant those over. All right, so I have a donor board here. What is this one for? BGA coal. This basically has one that has a bad solder joint somewhere, so it doesn't consistently stay on. So here's that same setup on the back side, and so we are going to be able to steal one of those components off of there, or all 3 of them. Yep. So let me first grab all 3 of these, and then we will get them put on the new board. All right, well, let me grab all 3 of these, and then we'll get them transplanted over to their board. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Now we'll get them installed on here. Add a little bit of flux. All right, we're going to heat this up, and then once the solder flows, then we can stick the capacitor in place. Okay, we got the first one. This one we're going to have to do a little bit off to the side. Second one. Oh, that one did not stick all the way. There we go. We're going to adjust them in a second. I just want to get them kind of tacked there. Okay, all 3 of them are tacked there. Now we can add new flux, and we'll reflow them and sit them in the right position. Okay, that one's good. That one's good. That one's good. All right, so I just found that the best practice is to just tack it there temporarily. That way the surface tension of the solder will hold it in place. Then you come back and reheat it with some flux, and then it will reflow and set itself in there perfectly. Now we got to clean up our area. We want to get all this excess flux off the board while the board's warm. A little toothbrush, some isopropyl alcohol. We'll just rub it in and just wipe it off. All right. Now that we have the new capacitors installed, let me reset my charger, and then we can test. All right, the new capacitor is installed. Here's that current sense resistor that we had the short on earlier, and we're going to measure there. The short is gone. So we don't have a short anymore. I'm going to reassemble the board. We can plug it in and test to see if we actually do get that Dell screen. All right, I got the motherboard installed, new thermal paste, so it's back together. Let's see if this thing turns on and we get the Dell screen. So keep an eye on the power meter here. And we got 0.02, which is really good. And actually it's firing up immediately. So it went to 0.9 for a second, then turned back off. Let's see if it turns back on, 1.4. Yeah, we're up to 2 amps. That's perfect. So let's wait for this to go through its CMOS reset, and let's see if we do get that Dell screen. We're up to 4 amps. We have the battery installed, so some of this is going to be charge current, but it is going through its startup process. I don't see the keyboard backlight on though, which is kind of suspicious. But sometimes it does take a little bit of time before it starts up. And we do have the Dell screen. So we were able to resolve this issue. It ended up just being a capacitor on the CPU's power rail, or the main power rail, but right behind the CPU. There is a lot of heat generated by those MOSFETs, so I have seen this a lot. It is booting to Windows now, and we were able to save this laptop. I'd love to know your thoughts on this one, and thanks for watching. I saved another laptop!